Welcome back to LifeAfter, the bleeding world, and wow, what an episode. Episode 6, The Train Station, Battle of the Tracks, was an adrenaline rush from start to finish. If you haven't caught up yet, buckle in because things got intense. We kicked things off with Rick and Sparrow making their way into the abandoned train station, but, surprise, surprise, it wasn't just the undead they had to worry about. A ruthless gang was occupying the area, armed to the teeth and ready to fight. Did Rick back down? Of course not. Flamethrower in hand, he cleared the platform with fire and fury, while Sparrow provided some deadly backup from the shadows. But that was just the warm-up. Once inside, they discovered hostages being held by the gang deeper in the station. And you know Rick, saving lives isn't just a choice, it's the mission. After an explosive firefight, the gang was wiped out. But just when things seemed calm, the undead crashed the party. And let's not forget that boss fight. Bodes, Jungle Justice, was a beast. Massive, wielding 2 deadly axes, and flanked by infected giants, he wasn't going down easy. Rick had to unload every clip just to slow him down. And when he grabbed Sparrow mid-battle? Talk about heart-stopping. Oh, and defusing bombs in the train yard with seconds to spare? Classic Rick and Sparrow teamwork. This episode was packed with action, danger, and a whole lot of heart-pounding moments. But something tells me we're not out of the woods yet. The station's depths still hold secrets, and knowing this world, none of them are good. The wheels of Rick's bike cut through the silence of Liven City's empty streets, the low rumble of the engine echoing faintly between the hollowed-out buildings. Sparrow sat quietly behind him, arms wrapped around his waist, her gaze fixed on the blurred ruins as they passed. Her silence was rare, but Rick didn't question it. Maybe she felt the same weight he did, the weight of everything that had happened at the train station. Rick's grip tightened on the handlebars as his thoughts churned. The bodies, the fire, the fight with Odes, it replayed in his head like a broken reel. He exhaled sharply, trying to push the memories down. Survive first, think later. It had always been his mantra, but lately, survival felt like a hollow prize. The city around them was a ghost of what it once was. Skyscrapers loomed like jagged tombstones, their glass shattered, steel frameworks twisted and exposed. The streets were cracked, littered with debris and rusted vehicles that hadn't moved in years. Every corner seemed to carry a whisper of the past, forgotten lives, abandoned dreams. Neon signs flickered weakly overhead, remnants of stores that had long since been looted or collapsed. Liven City felt more like a corpse than a home. Rick glanced in the bike's side mirror, catching a glimpse of Sparrow's distant eyes. She hadn't spoken since they left the train station. Maybe she was thinking about the hostages. Maybe she was trying to forget, too. Rick didn't ask. There were some questions better left unanswered. A cold wind cut through the streets, carrying the faint scent of ash and rot. Rick adjusted his scarf and pressed forward, weaving through the wreckage that lined the road. His mind wandered back to the entrance they were headed for, the Abyss Forbidden Zone. Even thinking the name felt wrong, like tempting fate. It wasn't his first time entering the Abyss. But it was Sparrow's. He braked softly as the road sloped downward, the shadows thickening as they approached the outer perimeter. Ahead of them stood the entrance, a rusted metal gate, half crushed under the weight of fallen beams. The warning sign beside it was faded, but the message still bled through, restricted area. No return beyond this point. Rick pulled the bike to a stop, the engine sputtering into silence. The only sounds left were the faint hum of the wind and the distant moan of something lurking deeper in the city. He kicked down the stand and dismounted, glancing at Sparrow as she slid off behind him. Without another word, they stepped through the crumbling gate, the abyss swallowing them whole. The metal doors slid shut behind Rick and Sparrow with a deep mechanical hiss. The faint hum of the Abyss Forbidden Zone echoes through the chamber, vibrating beneath their feet. The air is cold and stale, thick with the scent of rust and decay. Rick grips his flamethrower tightly, eyes scanning the circular space. The walls, floor, and ceiling are constructed entirely of dark, reinforced metal, scarred and worn by time. The gate ahead opens with a groaning creak. A narrow hallway stretches forward, lined with jagged steel panels and twisted beams. In the distance, faint shuffling can be heard. Rick steps forward cautiously, the soft tap of Sparrow's boots following closely behind. The moment his foot touches the grated floor, a low growl echoes from the darkness. A lone zombie stumbles forward, its rotted face twisted in a silent snarl. Without hesitation, Rick squeezes the trigger. A burst of flame roars down the corridor, engulfing the creature. Its screams are short-lived as it crumbles to ash, leaving only a smoldering pile in its place. Rick exhales sharply, eyes fixed ahead. They never learn. They press on, moving through the winding metallic passage. The grated walkway beneath their feet clatters with every step. As they turn a corner, a group of 9 zombies stands in the middle of the path, blocking their way forward. Their eyes reflect the dull light, and their decayed hands claw at the air. Rick doesn't wait. Another jet of fire erupts from the flamethrower, sweeping across the narrow walkway. The zombies shriek and collapse, their bodies flaring like torches. The flames lick the walls, leaving charred streaks along the metal. Sparrow watches silently, her gaze fixed on the smoldering remains. Efficient. Rick smirks faintly. Gets the job done. They continue forward. As they step onto a metal-plated platform, faint footsteps echo above. Suddenly, several zombies drop from an overhead grate, landing with sickening thuds around them. Rick steps back, quickly unleashing another wave of fire, the blaze swirling around him and Sparrow. The last of the creatures collapses, smoke rising from their scorched bodies. Rick steps forward carefully, ensuring no movement lingers beneath the flames. Ahead lies an open metal elevator, a large, grated platform suspended by thick steel cables. The path forward is clear. Rick and Sparrow step onto the platform. Rick grips the control lever and glances at Sparrow. No turning back now. Sparrow nods, her expression unwavering. Let's see what's waiting below. With a heavy clank, the elevator begins to descend, disappearing into the depths of the abyss. The elevator creaks and groans as it descends deeper into the abyss. Rick grips the flamethrower firmly, eyes locked on the shifting darkness beyond the grated walls. Sparrow stands behind him, quiet but alert. Suddenly, movement. A group of zombies clings to the metal framework, crawling along the sides of the shaft. Rick wastes no time. He leans forward and fires a burst of flames, engulfing them. One by one, they fall, charred and lifeless, tumbling into the shadows below. The elevator shudders to a halt at the next platform. The heavy doors slide open, revealing a sprawling corridor leading to an old control room. Rusted panels line the walls, and the air smells of burnt wires and decay. Int. Control room, night. Rick steps inside, his gaze sweeping across the derelict equipment. The control panels flicker weakly, screens cracked and buttons corroded. He slings the flamethrower over his back and kneels by the central console, prying open a rusted panel. Sparrow lingers near the entrance, eyes scanning the corridor outside. The faint shuffle of footsteps echoes from the distance. Rick pulls a bundle of cables free, brow furrowed as he begins rewiring. Sparks crackle with each adjustment. I need a few minutes. Sparrow nods but keeps her attention fixed on the hall. The shuffling grows louder. Shapes emerge in the distance, more zombies, drawn by the noise. Rick works faster, sweat beading on his forehead. Almost there. Zombies reach, snarling and clawing their way toward Rick. Sparrow steps aside as Rick rises, unleashing a sweeping jet of fire that engulfs the undead. They collapse, smoldering at his feet. Rick kneels again, twisting the last wire into place. The machine hums to life, screens flickering with faint green light. Rick's pulse quickened as the infected man lumbered toward the center of the arena, his massive form blocking any possible escape route. There was no way around this. Rick knew he had to move fast, and with precision. He glanced quickly at the G3 slung across his back, feeling the weight of the rifle's stock pressing against his shoulder. With a swift motion, he unslung the weapon, his fingers working the bolt as he brought it to bear. The G3, sturdy and reliable, felt like an extension of his body as he steadied it against the metal wall. His eyes locked onto the hulking figure of the infected, watching as it bellowed in rage, oblivious to the danger looming over it. Rick took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't let the creature close the distance. As the infected man charged, Rick squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the arena, the bullet tearing through the air with deadly precision. It struck the infected man's shoulder, but it barely slowed him down. The beast roared, more enraged than hurt, and began to charge faster, his heavy footsteps shaking the metal floor. Rick's heart raced, but his hands were steady. He fired again, this time aiming for the torso. The bullet struck, and the infected man staggered, but it wasn't enough to bring him down. "Damn it," Rick muttered under his breath. He adjusted his stance, quickly taking a few steps back as the infected closed in. Sparrow shifted, watching the monster's every move. "Hit him in the head, Rick." Rick didn't need to be told twice. The next shot was quick, almost instinctive. The bullet pierced the infected skull, and the creature let out a final, deafening roar before collapsing in a heap, its massive form crumpling like a rag doll. Rick's chest heaved with the sudden relief, but he didn't let his guard down. He glanced around, making sure nothing else was moving. "That was too close," Rick said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he reloaded the G3. He kept his eyes on the ground, watching for any signs of movement. Sparrow didn't speak, she simply nodded, her face unreadable as she took her position beside him. Rick's hand slammed against the control panel, and with a groan of metal, the large metal plate began to descend, slowly revealing the path below. The sound of grinding gears echoed throughout the arena, and the heavy plate moved with a menacing slowness. Without missing a beat, Rick's eyes scanned the space in front of him. Zombies shuffled out from the shadows, attracted by the movement. Rick quickly raised his flamethrower and unleashed a torrent of flames, watching as the undead writhed and burned. The air grew thick with smoke and the smell of charred flesh, but Rick didn't pause. He pushed forward, torching everything in his path. As the metal plate finally reached its full descent, Rick took a quick glance around. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, but there was no time to waste. He moved toward the open panel, flames still licking at the zombies, clearing the area as he went. The sound of shuffling feet and grotesque moans grew louder as more of the undead appeared, emerging from side rooms and corridors. Rick moved like a machine, efficiently clearing the area. His flamethrower did most of the work, but he was always ready with his G3, picking off any zombies that got too close. The tight hallways were a nightmare, but Rick kept his cool, methodically checking each corner and watching for movement. Finally, after clearing several side rooms, Rick reached a large, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with metal shelves and scientific equipment, but in the center of the room stood a large, humming machine. It was complex, its various parts blinking with lights and shifting with mechanical precision. Rick's eyes quickly scanned the room, his gaze sharp and calculating. That's when he saw it, an injured person in a lab coat, barely conscious, slumped against the machine. The person's face was pale, their breathing shallow, and blood oozed from a wound on their side. Rick's heart skipped a beat. Was this someone who could help them, or another casualty of this twisted world?
"I'm not feeling so good. Who are you guys?" I don't know anything. The infection. It's everywhere. Please, help me out here.
Rick's hands were already slick with sweat as he quickly hoisted the injured person onto a nearby table, making sure they were secure. The room was still silent except for the hum of the machine, but the brief respite didn't last long. Suddenly, the screech of metal filled the air. The large, round metal plate above Rick began to retract, opening the pathway once more. From the shadows, the familiar shuffle of the undead grew louder. Rick's eyes darted to the newly opened space, and his gut tightened as he saw the first few zombies falling from the ceiling, like rats dropping from a trap. Without a moment's hesitation, Rick grabbed the flamethrower and swung it around to face the incoming horde. The first wave of zombies hit the ground with sickening thuds, their broken limbs stumbling toward Rick, their eyes vacant and hungry. He didn't waste time aiming, he sprayed a wide arc of fire, engulfing the first few zombies in an instant. The heat from the flamethrower was almost blinding, but Rick stayed focused, firing in short bursts as he cleared his path. The zombies staggered and writhed in the flames, their bodies crumbling into ash and bone. Their pained shrieks echoed throughout the metal corridors, a grim reminder of the world they were in. More zombies fell, one after another, as the horde descended. Rick kept his movements tight and controlled, the flamethrower a deadly extension of his will. Every zombie that fell only brought more in its wake. They were relentless, but so was Rick. He burned them down, one by one, not giving an inch, not letting them close. His boots scraped across the cold metal as he repositioned, always keeping his back to the wall, and his eyes scanning for any sign of a new threat. As he cleared the last of them, the room was thick with smoke, and the smell of burning flesh lingered in the air. Rick's breath came in ragged gasps, but his eyes remained cold and sharp. He could hear the faint groans of the undead in the distance, but for now, the immediate danger was over. Rick glanced back toward the control panel, his mind already calculating his next move. There was no telling how long they'd have before more zombies came pouring in. Rick's boots hit the cold, hard ground with a thud as he jumped off the metal plate, his senses on high alert. The smoke from the flamethrower still lingered in the air, but Rick wasn't distracted. His focus was razor-sharp as his eyes darted across the room. The ground trembled, and a low, guttural growl rumbled through the metal walls. Rick's breath caught as he looked toward the center of the room. Emerging from the wreckage of debris was a giant, infected tortoise, its massive, armoring shell a grotesque fusion of stone and decayed flesh. The creature's size dwarfed anything Rick had faced before, its body easily the size of a truck. Its legs were thick and muscular, built for support under the weight of its armored shell, and its massive head twisted to focus on Rick with glowing, bloodshot eyes. The beast's jaws opened in a wide, terrifying screech, shaking the ground beneath Rick's feet. Its gnarled claws scraped across the metal as it turned toward him, its movements slow but powerfully calculated. Rick's heart raced. This wasn't a creature he could outrun or outlast, it was a living fortress. He had to think fast. The rifle's barrel bucked as it fired, the bullet slamming into the tortoise's thick shell. The impact reverberated through the air, but the beast barely flinched. Rick's eyes narrowed. He couldn't hit the shell, not like this. He needed to aim for the soft spots, and those were few and far between. The giant tortoise let out another guttural roar and began charging. Its heavy body pounded against the floor, the thundering steps shaking the metal beneath Rick's feet. He dove to the side just as the tortoise's clawed foot slammed down where he had been standing, sending a spray of metal shards flying in all directions. Rick scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, and took another shot. This time, he aimed for the underbelly, where the armor was thinner. The bullet struck, and the beast staggered slightly, but it didn't slow down. The tortoise swung its massive tail, the thick appendage cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Rick barely avoided the tail's deadly arc, rolling to the side and narrowly escaping a crushing blow. His pulse was racing, and his mind was running calculations. The tortoise was slow, but each swing of its tail or charge was catastrophic. He couldn't keep dodging forever. Rick fired again, this time aiming for the joint between the tortoise's armored legs. The bullet found its mark, and the creature staggered, but it was still on the attack, relentlessly pressing forward. The beast's movements were like a slow-moving avalanche, its massive head lunging at Rick with snapping jaws. Rick ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the bite, his body aching with the effort. He had to finish this, now. The tortoise turned, giving Rick the opening he needed. He dashed forward, using the momentum to get underneath the beast. With a final, calculated shot, he fired at the soft underside of its neck, where the skin was unprotected. The G3's bullet tore through the creature's flesh with a sickening crunch. The tortoise let out a deafening, ear-piercing shriek as its head snapped back, thrashing wildly. It tried to retaliate, but the wound was too severe. The giant creature staggered, its movements slowing as blood pooled around its feet. Rick didn't wait to see the aftermath. He fired again, making sure to end the creature's life before it could take another swing. Finally, with a final thundering crash, the giant tortoise fell, its massive body slamming into the ground, shaking the entire room. Silence settled in the aftermath, the only sound being Rick's labored breathing as he lowered his rifle. Rick stood over the fallen beast, sweat dripping from his brow. His chest heaved with exhaustion, and his hands gripped the G3 tightly. He could feel the adrenaline still surging through him, but he knew better than to celebrate yet. This victory had come at a high cost, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down.